His question is, if the Buddha said that the Dhamma is very great and very profound, he compared it to the leaves in the leaves, is it? Leaves in the forest, is it? Then he said, in that case, how can the Dhamma be confined to the 4 Nikayas? You see? Now, to understand this, like to understand many things in the Dhamma, first you have to study the 4 Nikayas. When you understand the 4 Nikayas, then you will know for yourself. Basically, it's like this. Buddha is just a human being, just that he's enlightened. But even though our Buddha is enlightened, he's still very human, Sometimes he like to joke. Sometimes he can even appear like say the wrong words, say the wrong things. For example, there was one sutta. He came to a certain town. He had no place to stay. So his relative brought him to stay with one ascetic who was formerly his friend when he was practicing with the external ascetic. So when he went to stay with this ascetic, at night his relative came to visit him. This relative was a big man in that town of Kapilavatthu, a Sakyan, a very well-known Sakyan, a rich man and all that. So when he came to see the Buddha, then the Buddha taught him some Dhamma. Then the Buddha asked him a question. So the answer is either A or B. Okay? So the Buddha asked him a question. So when he was about to reply, this external ascetic, he thought he want to sort of, teach this, the Sakyan, the rich Sakyan, so as to be in his favor. So he told this Sakyan to reply, for example, A and B. He told this Sakyan to reply A. So when he told the Sakyan to reply A, the Buddha, I don't know whether jokingly or not, told the Sakyan to reply B. So after he thought for a while, he thought maybe his answer is wrong. So the Buddha said reply B. So he told the Sakyan, reply B. When the Buddha heard that, the Buddha said, reply A. So he thought for a while, maybe A is right. Then he told the Sakyan, reply A. Third time the Buddha said, reply B. Contradict him 3 times, So he malu no face, every time he's wrong. So he felt so bad. That night, he took up all his things back and ran away. So you see, the Buddha is so human, he can, I don't know whether you can call this an error or not, but he didn't give that ascetic any face. So sometimes people say the Buddha is so kind, he never scold. No, he never scold. Sometimes he call his monks a fool, bala, bodo, scold, As one sutta, he scolded the Brahmins very badly, compared them to dogs. They're worse than dogs. So, coming back to your question, you see, the Buddha said that once he was asked, are all Buddhas the same? He said no. In the sense that no, he was asked whether the sasana's life is always very long. He said no. He said the reason is different Buddhas, they teach different, There are some Buddhas, they speak many suttas. Like our Buddha is supposed to be one of the best, Sariputta said, you cannot find a higher Buddha than our Buddha. So, the Buddha said, there are some Buddhas who teach a lot of sutta. There are some Buddhas, that teach very little, very few suttas, And because they teach very few suttas, and also very little Vinaya, Dhamma Vinaya, the 2 things, There are some Buddhas teach a lot of Dhamma Vinaya. The sasana lasts longer, and more people attain. But there are some Buddhas, they teach very little, very little Dhamma Vinaya. So the sasana does not last very long, and less people attain. Why? They are all humans, right? They're just like us. No two persons are the same. You cannot find two Buddhas exactly the same one. No. So even though the Dhamma is very profound, the Buddha is a human being, so his life is limited. How can he speak forever? No. And also up to him how much he wants to speak. There is a sutta where Ananda asked the Buddha, he said, why is it, Lord? He said, sometimes people come, you speak to them. Some people come, you don't want to speak to them. Why? Then the Buddha said, I look at him now. If he comes, he is interested in the Dhamma, he is respectful, I say some words to him. Then if he listens, I say some more. If he don't listen, I keep quiet. If he asks me questions, I'll answer him some more. If he don't ask me questions, I keep quiet. And then if he is a person, he comes and hear Dhamma from me, he goes back, he doesn't practice. Next time he come, I won't speak to him, won't teach him anything. See? So all depends. Buddha, he look at people, he teach. Dhamma is very precious, don't simply give very easily. People don't respect. Sometimes you give too much Dhamma, people don't respect. You see, for example, when Buddhism first came to China, the first patriarch was supposed to be Bodhidharma. He was a very serious practicing monk. So his disciple, the first disciple who wanted to come and learn from him, they're supposed to be the second patriarch in China, asked him to teach Dhamma. He refused to teach. Asked Bodhidharma to teach. He thought, this fellow not fit for me to teach. I don't want to teach him. Then this fellow continued to press him so often. He said, I won't teach you until the white snow becomes red. And this fellow went to take a knife, cut his hand. The blood spilled all over the place. The snow became red. Then came to see Bodhidharma. Then he looked at him. This fellow really sincere. Then only he taught him Dhamma. Nowadays, you give too much Dhamma talk, people don't appreciate. Won't come also. Person attains Sotapanna, it does not mean he has no eye. When a person attains the Sotapanna, 3 factors are destroyed now. One is the view of a body of a being in the body, Sakaya Ditti. The view of a being in the body. Because normally we think the body is I. When a person attains the Sotapanna, then he realizes this body is not I. But there is still an I somewhere. It's just like the Anagami in the sutta. There's one sutta where some Theras, they thought a certain monk was an Anagami. Actually, he's an Anagami. So these Theras, they have not attained any higher stage. So they wanted him to teach. So they asked him, what's the state of an Anagami like? So he said, the state of an Anagami is that he knows that there is no, theoretically, he knows that there is no I, no soul. But somehow he still has that inside somewhere. He still clings to that I. And then he gave a simile of I think something like a cloth has a certain smell. Then he will go and wash it clean. After he wash it clean, it's clean of all the dirt. But still that little smell persists. That little smell persists. So I'm talking about this, whether he knows he's got this, he's a Sotapanna all the time. It's only when he contemplates, only he knows. I don't think that he knows all the time that he's Sotapanna. In the sutta, there's a simile given of a person whose hand is cut. He's got no hand. But when he's not thinking that he's got no hand, he does not realize he's got no hand, you know. You use your left hand to shake hands with him, he'll come out with his arm. Actually, he's got no arm. You see? It's only when he thinks, actually I have no left hand. I have to use my right hand. The important thing is to study the suttas. As I said, try to buy the 4 Nikayas and study it again and again. And after some time, you have a certain understanding of the sutta. Then the Buddha said there are 4 things that if you have, you can be quite sure that you have entered the stream and won't fall into the woeful plains. One, you have unshakable faith. You have saddha. You have strong confidence or faith in the Buddha. You have strong confidence or trust in the Dhamma, in the Sangha. And then your 5 precepts are quite pure. If you have these things, you can be quite, provided you have that understanding of the sutta, of the discourses. It mentioned that you need to study all the 4 Nikayas and relate them, because the suttas, you cannot take one sutta and say this is the absolute truth. As I mentioned in my previous talk in Ipoh, I say one sutta will explain the truth from one angle. Another sutta will explain the truth from another angle. The more suttas you read, then you will see from various angles and you will understand better. For example, I did mention in the Ipoh talk that some people think just by studying the Satipatthana Sutta, you know all about Satipatthana. You don't. In the Sangyutta Nikaya, there are very many important suttas that deal with Satipatthana. And even that is not all. In the Digha Nikaya, again you have, and the Majjhima Nikaya, again you have suttas that deal with Satipatthana. So unless you study all these suttas, you might come to some wrong conclusions. For example, I mentioned earlier, there is one sutta that says, Samatha, tranquilization, will give you concentration, which in turn will make you abandon lust. And then it also says that Vipassana, contemplation, will give you wisdom. And so from this sutta alone, you might think that Samatha only gives you concentration, and Vipassana is the one that gives you wisdom. But you can find another sutta which says almost the opposite. Namely that a bright mind, if you cultivate your samadhi, your concentration so strong until your mind becomes very bright, that is the best condition for insight. In other words, samadhi here will give you wisdom. And then it says, contemplation on the 32 parts of the body will make you abandon lust. So just now there it says concentration makes you abandon lust. Here it says contemplation makes you abandon lust. Quite the opposite. So you can only reconcile this by understanding that Samatha and Vipassana must work together. You cannot separate them. To separate them is to misunderstand, because as I mentioned in my previous talk, there's one sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, I think 149, that says that when you cultivate the Aryan Eightfold Path and you develop it fully, automatically all the 37 Bodhipakya Dhammas are developed fully. Namely the 4 Satipatthana, the 4 Samappadana, the 4 right efforts, the 4 Iddhipada, the 5 Bala, the 5 Indriya, the 7 Bojjhanga, the 8 factors of the Aryan Fold Path. All these automatically are developed when you develop the Aryan Eightfold Path. And it also adds that when all these are fully developed, then Samatha and Vipassana work together. They are led to work together, Samatha and Vipassana. So how can you separate them? Cultivated the mind until the hindrances are cleared. Then, you see, this attainment depends on your level of jhana you attain. See, the Sotapanna does not need jhana, according to the sutta, right? They just hear the Dhamma and they attain. Whereas the Sakadagami, they need a lower level. They may not have all the 4 jhanas, maybe they have 1 jhana. And then they suppress the sensual lust and the ill will. But the Anagami must have the 4 jhana. The Arahant must have the 4 jhana. That is extremely rare. And either that person has already developed the 4 jhanas this lifetime or previous lifetime. You see, for example, in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha said that if you practice Satipatthana, you will either attain Anagami or Arahanthood in 7 years, 6 years, 5 years, down to 7 days, The minimum was mentioned was 7 days, right? Yet, if you study the Vinaya, you find that the 6 Arahant, the Buddha helped to enlighten, the number 6 after the 5 bhikkhus, was a monk called Yasa. And this Yasa was a person who had very great paramis. He must have already done a lot of cultivation in his past life. Because in the Vinaya, what happened was, the Buddha somehow I think the Buddha used his psychic power to make this Yasa come to him. This Yasa was like the Buddha. He was from a very well-to-do family, so he was surrounded by slaves and women who attended to him all the time. So one night, when all these attendants, slaves and musicians and all that fell asleep, in the middle of the night he woke up, maybe by the help of the Buddha. Middle of the night he woke up, then he looked around him, all these slaves and all these women are lying around like corpses. Because these people in India, when people are dead, they throw into the jungle and the animals will eat them. So it's not uncommon to see corpses. So when he saw all these slaves, all these women sleeping around him, some with their mouth open, some with the saliva coming down, and some snoring and all that, and he looked at the hair all. So he looked at them, they really look like corpses. So because of past cultivation, this thing impressed him as dukkha, So he said to himself, dukkha, dukkha. So he was disgusted, he didn't want to stay there. He walked out of his big mansion. He walked out, and then I think probably the Buddha or Devas helped him to go into the jungle to see the Buddha. So when he went to see the Buddha, he was saying dukkha, dukkha. The Buddha said, come here. Yes, sir, come here. There's no dukkha here. So when he heard there's no dukkha, quickly he was very happy to come near the Buddha. So when he sat near the Buddha talked to him Dhamma. When the Buddha talked to him Dhamma, very soon he became a Sotapan, stated in the Vinaya. So after he attained stream entry, after that he stayed with the Buddha. Then the next day, his father was worried for him. So his father went out looking for him, thought what happened to him, because probably he comes from such a rich family. He thought he was kidnapped or something. So his father went out of the city gates and went looking for him, and then found his slippers along the way. Found his slippers, and then his father started walking, and then came to the Buddha also. And the Buddha used his psychic power and asked the father to sit down. The father said he was looking for his son. Buddha made him asked him to sit down, but used his psychic power to block the sun from his view. Although the son was sitting beside the Buddha, the father couldn't see him. So the Buddha said, sit here, sit down here. Maybe you'll find your son. So when he heard the Buddha say, maybe I'll find my son, he thought this is a holy man, can't be lying. So he sat down there. Then the Buddha spoke Dhamma to him. When the Buddha spoke Dhamma to him, he became a Sotapan. At the same time as his son was hearing the Dhamma, his son became an Arahant. So this is one of the rare cases, somebody come to hear the Dhamma, 2 days only became an Arahant. This kind of rare case is not the general case. Is the exception, you see. So there are always exceptions, but the thing is you cannot use exceptions to make the rule. Yes, no? The rule is that, the general rule is that, for example, a person must cultivate the Aryan Eightfold Path. Yes, no? And all the 8 factors must be there, including the 4 jhanas. But if somebody has already cultivated maybe very high jhanas up to arupa jhanas in the previous life, when he comes into this life, his mind is very clear, This is a kind of translation which attempts to get at the meaning of the word, but it's not a literal translation. So it's not a very good translation, The word yoni means the womb. It also means the source. It also means the starting point. So when you say yoniso, it means down to the womb, or down to the starting point, or maybe up to the starting point, up to the source, okay? So when you say manasikara means consideration, so when you say yoniso manasikara, it means you are able to consider the problem right up to the very source, the starting point of the problem. Now, to be able to consider the problem up to the starting point, it consists of many, many steps, right? So unless your mind is very strong, you start thinking of this problem, you consider, say for example, there are 10 steps. You think 3 steps, after that your mind is sidetracked. You start thinking of your home, your wife said something to you this morning. Then you start to come back, your mind is not strong. It cannot lead you right up to the source of the problem. Whereas a person with strong samadhi, because his concentration is very good, when he thinks of a problem, he can follow the line of argument, or the steps up to the very source. Then he can understand the problem. That's why yoniso manasikara, you cannot have it unless you have a composed mind, a certain amount of samadhi. In fact, it's the same with sati. Sati is defined in about 8 suttas. There are 8 suttas that define sati in long words, And it actually means being able to remember what you said and you did a long time ago. That is the real definition of sati. So people translate it as mindfulness. As I said in my earlier talk, if by mindfulness you mean being able to remember, that is perfectly correct. But if you think that mindfulness means when the form comes, I must know what it is. When the sound comes, I have to observe the sound, know the sound. When the smell comes, taste, touch and all these things, that is not mindfulness, Mindfulness, in this case of sati, a better translation is actually recollectedness, or composure, a composed mind, a recollected mind. Recollected means, recollectedness means you are able to recollect. That is precisely the meaning of sati, you are able to recollect. So, in one of the suttas, somebody asked the Buddha, why is it I cannot remember some of the chants? I practiced many times, I learned so long, I still cannot remember it. And the Buddha said the reason is because of the 5 hindrances. When you have 5 hindrances, you cannot remember things. So, it's only when you get rid of the 5 hindrances, you can remember. Then you will understand. Actually, to have sati, to be able to remember, you have to get rid of the hindrances. If you don't get rid of the hindrances, you don't have sati. So, sometimes these translations, we take the translation to be correct. It might not be correct. That's why actually to really understand the Buddha's words, you have to learn some Pali, and then check the translation. Is it correct or not correct? This sati is a quality, Sati is a quality. The quality of being able to remember. And as I mentioned just now, you can only remember well if your 5 hindrances are abandoned. In other words, sati is an indication of some level of concentration. So, as I said just now, when your mind is concentrated, then you are automatically mindful. If you don't have that concentration, you try to be mindful, you cannot be mindful all the time. You are only trying to be mindful. But you cannot do it away with mindfulness also. Before you have that concentration, you need that mindfulness, that practice of mindfulness, that persistent practice of mindfulness that will eventually develop into concentration. You see? If you continue being mindful, it must develop into concentration. And that concentration in turn will support your mindfulness. So you cannot separate these two. Mindfulness and concentration, they support each other. As just explained just now, the purpose of being able to recollect is to have that strength of mind. This, as I said just now, sati is a quality, If you want to recollect, you can. The Buddha never asked us to recollect all the bad experience. The Buddha said, in the practice of sati, only 4 things you must be mindful of. Only 4 things, The body, the feelings, the mind, and the Buddha's teaching, the Dhamma. Only 4 things. Don't be mindful of any other thing. If you run away from these 4 things, the Buddha said, you are going into Mara's ground. Mara can catch you. So it's only these 4 things. That's why even these 4 things, the Buddha never said to practice all these 4 things at once. The Buddha said practice 1 at a time. And when you practice 1, if you practice it correctly, it must give you one-pointedness of mind. Because one-pointedness of mind will make you see things as they really are. So Samatha and Vipassana, they are related. They, just like mindfulness and concentration, they support each other. The Buddha said, when you contemplate on these 4 things, it is not thinking about these 4 things. But when you don't have concentration, this is what you tend to do. You tend to think about these 4 things. So initially, it might be okay. But that is not high wisdom, Because the Buddha said if we use our thinking mind, that is a lower kind of wisdom. What the Buddha was trying to tell us was to cultivate the higher mind. And the higher mind is to develop the jhana, so that your mind is lifted to a higher level. And when you contemplate on something, you understand something sort of intuitively. Straight away you know. It's just like the Buddha, they want to know something, they don't go and think about it. And the Arahants want to know something, they just incline their mind to something, straight away they know. That is not thinking, that is intuitive wisdom. So that is the purpose of meditation, to bring our mind to a higher level, so that when we contemplate something, we can really perceive it in depth. If we start thinking, it's just the shallow part. In fact, if we meditate, if we practice meditation and your concentration grows, you will get the feeling that you are going inside your mind. You are going deeper and deeper inside your mind. And our mind is like is something hard, And something hard, say like ice. If you try to get inside the ice, you cannot. Right? You have to cultivate your mind until it becomes softer. When it becomes softer, then you can penetrate deeper and deeper. And if you can penetrate deeper, it means you are opening up your mind. And depending on how much you open up your mind, that is the depth of level of wisdom you will get. If say the mind can be opened up so much, say 10 feet, just for example, the mind can be opened up 10 feet. If you just open up your mind half a foot, then when you contemplate something, your understanding is so shallow. But if you can open your mind, say 5 feet, then when you contemplate something, your understanding goes deeper, it's more profound.